Alright guys, and welcome to another video. Today we're going to be counting down the top 10 most irritating mobs in the Burning Crusade. So a number of these mobs are dungeon mobs, but the vast majority of them are actually open world mobs that just had particular scripting or particular debuffs which were just extremely frustrating. But anyway guys, if you enjoyed the video, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. But anyway, let's jump in. And I'd also like to quickly thank people who left suggestions on my community post about a couple of weeks ago. And the first mob on this list is the Hellboar. Now there are various different Hellboars throughout Outland, some of them in Hellfire Peninsula, some of them in Shadowmoon Valley, but most of them have the similar scripting. And one of their most irritating things is the fact that they charge you. They actually charge stun you. It doesn't matter whether you're running past them very quickly on your mount, even with Crusader Aura up, they will charge you, and then you would get temporarily stunned, which means they have an extra few chances to hit you in the back, which means they have an increased chance to obviously dismount you, and they are extremely frustrating, particularly if you're trying to get through an area with numerous Hellboars around, because you're just getting constantly charged and charged and charged, and you're pretty much guaranteed to get absolutely dismounted. So you can just not pass through a Hellboar area unless you are extremely lucky. Most of the time you are just going to have to go all the way around. It doesn't even matter what level you are, because they will just dismount you. So the next mob on this list we have is the Sunfury Archer, which in my opinion is probably the most difficult mob to deal with in the game, even if you are level 70. I'm going to show you an example of that right now. I may as well live record this, so I'm going to pull the Sunfury Archer, and as you will notice, first of all he's ranged, so that's automatically a bit of a problem. If you go into melee range, they net you, and then run away and continue to do range damage, and there's a chance of them actually running into other people as they do that. And they basically just constantly kite you, and then they'll basically run into other people. As you can see here, he's ran all the way up to there, and I can't even get to him because of the mountain, but yeah, now he's going to pull that other one. Well, no, he's not actually for some reason. No, he is. Right, so I've got two of them on me now. Two of them, which means that I'm going to get snared twice as much. And it just takes absolutely ages to actually kill these mobs, even at level 70. The next mob we're going to talk about is the giant rock elementals. Again, there's a number of different ones throughout Outland. There's some in Neverstorm. The first ones you're going to encounter in Hellfire Peninsula. The ones I'm talking about are the Farallon breakers specifically. And the issue with these giant rock elementals is after a while, when they get to a certain amount of health, they start to split. So this means a number of different and new rock elementals start spawning, and when more and more mobs spawn, the amount of damage that they do doesn't reduce. They end up doing double damage, triple damage, quadruple damage, so you end up taking loads and loads of damage, and then you end up panicking, like, do I continue focusing the main mob? Do I focus on the little ones? And most of the time you just end up taking way too much damage and dying. In my experience, the trick is to not AoE the little ones down. You should single target them and kill them as fast as humanly possible, because it will massively reduce the amount of damage that you are taking. But nonetheless, these mobs are best dealt with in groups. They are normally associated with group quests, and you will probably need a group in order to take these guys down. The next mob we're going to be talking about is the Arcane Protector from Karazhan. So the irritating thing about this mob is the fact that only one kind of damage type can actually deal damage to the mob at once. So this is either melee damage, range damage, or magic damage. So as you can imagine, as a protection tank, this is extremely difficult because I do melee damage and magic damage at the same time. Now the issue is, what if I deal mana damage? I take about 600 damage every time I deal magic damage, so that's actually quite a serious amount of damage. Which means it's pretty much impossible for me to get aggro on these mobs, and it's pretty much essential that a warrior tank has to be there. But then if the warrior tank can't do melee damage, then he's in a difficult situation, basically just has to soak all of the damage. And if you're a DPS, it's just irritating because you have to stop, start, stop, start, stop, start. Sometimes you don't even do damage for the entire fight, and the fight just goes on forever because, you know, the magic dealers cannot deal any damage. The next mob we have is the Eclipsion Soldier, who very irritatingly, if you get them to basically the dead zone when they've got like 10% health left, they randomly cast this thing called Blood Heal and heal all the way to full. And you're like, how cheesy is that? Fair enough, they do actually get a debuff, which means they deal about 4% of their damage to themselves for the net, every 2 seconds after they've done that blood heal. But still, you're just there, nearly close to killing the mob, and then they just randomly heal to full, so it takes ages to kill them. The only way to counteract that would be to interrupt it or stun it just before it dies. But the issue with this area is, as you can see, there are actually a lot of patrolling mobs on this thing called the Path of Conquest. They've got Cavalier mobs running up and down, the Son of Goroks running up and down, and then there's this like big cavalry group. I can't remember the name of them, but I'll show you them right here. Yeah, there's this big patrol group here following Val Zarek the Conqueror, and they always just bump into you when you're really struggling to get these mobs down because they just keep healing themselves. The next mob we have is the Marshlight Bleeder, which very irritatingly puts a debuff on you that stops you from stealthing or going invisible for a whole minute. So as you can imagine, this is really irritating for feral druids and rogues because they can be dealing with these mobs and then all of a sudden they can't stealth, so they can't do the stealth openers on mobs to optimize the damage, and then if there's Horde running around or the Alliance running around, they can't stealth, which means they're out in the open, they're totally exposed, and that is extremely risky. Another irritating thing with the debuff is that it will increase your casting time by 20%, so if you're a class that relies heavily on hard casting like a mage or a warlock, well I guess a warlock less because they have dots, then it'll be very difficult for you to actually get casts off because they would take so long to actually cast. They did have a perk of having, increased damage, which is a bit of a weird one, but yeah, anyway. Next we have another mob from Zangarmarsh called the Marshfang Slicer. So this is kind of like a Never kind of mob, and what it would do is totally drain your mana pool. It would just basically spam drain mana on you, which is really irritating for me personally as a paladin because one, we have serious mana issues, we have very small mana pools, and all our damage is heavily reliant on actually having mana. So when I was dealing with these mobs, I just never had mana. I literally had to drink after every single mob individually, it drained that much mana from me. So farming these mobs for whatever quest they are attached to would just simply take ages, and then if you got caught off guard by a Horde player or Alliance player, you would have absolutely no mana, which means you're running around like a donkey not being able to do anything, is even as little as something as a Hand of Justice because you have absolutely no mana. The amount of times that has happened to me is unreal when I was leveling on this server. The next mob we have is a dungeon mob called the Shadow Moon Technician. Now there are actually variations of the Technician or Engineer mob around a few of the dungeons. There's one in Steam Vault as well. So what this mob basically does is randomly throw loads and loads and loads of grenades at you, and it's really irritating because you end up just getting one-shotted over time. They work similar to the engineers in Blackwing Lair, so as you can imagine they just throw these grenades at you and you just die. So what you have to do is constantly dance. I always tell people when I'm tanking this dungeon, remember to dance, remember to keep moving around, because they do throw it on the ground, which means they can be avoided. They don't throw it at the player, so you've got to avoid the grenades, and then there's also mines on the floor as well, which you've got to avoid as well. So there's loads of things to avoid, which is really difficult for a melee DPS, even more difficult probably for a ranged DPS, because obviously they have to sit there and cast, and they can't sit there and cast because they're just getting grenades thrown at them all the time. So range, stay at max range. Melee basically have to dance and just pray and cross the fingers really. The next irritating mob we have is the Cabal Ritualist, which is a mob from a Shadow Labyrinth in the first boss room. There are a number of groups of them stacked around these pillars doing a kind of ritual, and you have to pull all of them you have to pull each group individually, which means you have to pull a lot of them and deal with a lot of them. And first of all, very irritating for a tank because they have this ability called Gouge, which is really weird. They're basically like a spellcaster with a rogue ability, which does exactly what it is on the tin, exactly how it is for a normal rogue. It basically stuns you for about 3 seconds, which can be very irritating if you're trying to group them all together and build up aggro, so it is useful to wall hug them really well. The next thing, they have Frostbolt, which means they slow you. They have Ice Nova, which means they freeze you in place, and that can be very irritating if if you lose aggro on one of them and you have to go and pull the one of the mobs off your healer. Then on top of this, on Heroic, they can dispel debuffs. So if you want to polymorph one of them, they will actually help each other out and debuff polymorphs off each other, which, as you can imagine, is really irritating. They debuff they can debuff any of your debuffs, your dot debuffs, your stun debuffs, and basically if you want to CC them, a mage has to basically stand there and just spam polymorph in order to reduce the damage that the tank is taking. In order to actually survive these pulls, you basically have to spam CC on them, And on top of this, it's also really difficult because there are these fell over guards which are wandering around that do this AoE fear which totally resets aggro on the tank, and yeah, it can get very, very sticky and very stressful and very irritating dealing with these mobs, so yeah, you need a very, very skilled tank in order to deal with them. So the last mob on this list is the Shattered Hand Assassin, which is from Shattered Halls dungeon. So first irritating thing about these mobs is you can actually see them. They're totally stealthed when you're wandering around, and they patrol in between certain mob pack pulls, which means you will just totally forget about them, and then all of a sudden one of your party members is sapped, and then another party member is cheap shotted, which is probably going to be the tank because he was walking first, which means that the tank is just totally pinned down, and then the assassin just opens up on someone else, and just they can deal a lot of damage before anyone even understands what the hell is going on, and they can be very, very irritating in that respect, especially as even if you pop them out of stealth with a flare, which is a very, very good tactic to do by the way, when you're wandering through Shattered Halls, make sure your hunter is popping flares all the time. The irritating thing is that they can still use all their stealth abilities even when you pop them out of stealth early, so yeah, that can be really frustrating. Anyway guys, that's when we're going to end the video there. My name is Medagoblin, and in my next video, ciao.